The recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massie, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the topic of my special order.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak in opposition to H.R. 684 and S. 743, the Marketplace Fairness Act, otherwise known as the Internet Sales Tax, or as I call it, the Interstate Commerce Sales Tax. I'm concerned that this new tax on American consumers passed the Senate too quickly, without enough debate, and has the quiet support of several members here in the House. Unfortunately, many of my colleagues opposed to the bill here in the House have taken a quiet, wait-and-see attitude. They don't want to rock the boat, so to speak. Well, it's time to quit being quiet on this issue. The American public deserves a full and open debate on this bill before any legislative action is taken in this body. This evening, my colleagues and I will begin that debate. I'm confident that when members and their constituents grasp the full ramifications of this onerous piece of legislation, they will oppose it as well. Many states in this country are in dire financial straits. They've lavished overly generous pension plans on their state employees and offered tax credits and financial incentives to their favorite businesses. They've promised more than they can deliver while sometimes letting essential services go neglected. State governments bear the responsibility for their financial situations, yet they're looking to the federal government for a bailout. Make no mistake, this Internet tax is the bailout they're seeking. Without raising taxes, state governments can expect billions of dollars of Americans' hard-earned money to flow to their treasuries if this bill passes. And how would this happen? By passing a bill that proclaims to impose fairness. Who else is for this bill? Large retailers. They've got lots of representatives up here talking to us. They're on the Internet and they're off the Internet, but they're for this bill. They're weary of competing with small and nimble businesses. And that's natural to want to have economic barriers to entry, because it's an economic fact that in the absence of innovation in a market with no barriers to entry, profits go to zero in the long run. But how do we create barriers to entry in the United States? How do we compete? It's through innovation. America is the country of innovation. You can invent something. You could make a new piece of music. You could be nicer to your employees than the other company is. Or you can come up with a new, more efficient way of manufacturing your products. But I suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, that sending representatives to Washington, D.C. to impose financial hardships on your competitors is not the American way. Some have said that this bill is about states' rights, and I'm a strong proponent of states' rights. But this bill does nothing to protect states' rights. In fact, this bill changes the very fabric, the constitutional fabric, of the United States of America by subjecting people and businesses in one state to the taxes and regulations of another state. This is unprecedented. For the first time in history, this bill would grant states jurisdictions beyond their physical borders. If this bill passes, we'll have a virtual United States of America, where borders no longer mean anything. Justice Marshall ruled that the power to tax is the power to destroy. And we were reminded last week by the IRS's admission that the power to tax is the power to harass. I urge other members of Congress to consider the dangerous implications of granting individual states authority over individuals in other states. Before my colleagues get into the details of this new tax, I'd like to point out that no one, not a single person, has argued that this bill will help our economy. Even proponents of this bill must concede that it increases taxes on American consumers and adds burdensome regulations to small businesses. That's where this debate will begin and end. This bill is bad for our economy. I now yield to the gentleman from Florida.
I thank the gentleman from Kentucky, and thank you for your leadership on getting out ahead of this and really leading the charge. And you're right. This is not going to be good for the economy. And people will say, oh, it's not really a tax increase because some of these taxes are essentially use taxes that are already due. The fact of the matter is this will hurt consumers because they are going to, in fact, have to pay more. And that is not the recipe for success in a high unemployment, low growth economy, which is what we have now and is what we've had for a number of years. And in terms of making consumers pay more in taxes, I, for one, am sick of politicians in Washington and in state capitals throughout the country putting the interests of government ahead of the interests of the people. Our job is not to extract as much money as possible from our fellow citizens, but it's instead to provide a framework that protects their freedom and liberty and allows them to pursue their dreams. This bill obviously doesn't help do that. In fact, it would hinder it. And it would hinder it by making it more difficult on consumers, but also will make it more difficult on up-and-coming new businesses that do business online. This bill represents taxation without representation. And the reason it does that is because the bill would require online businesses to determine, collect, and remit taxes to states with which they have no physical connection. So if you have a business in Florida that does online sales and you sell to somebody in California, you're going to be responsible for determining California sales tax, collecting it, and then sending it to California. The problem is if you have no physical connection to that state, you have no way to hold tax-happy politicians in states like California accountable for the decisions they make in terms of taxing, spending, and regulation. And I would say also, people say that there are local stores who have to pay sales tax. If you sell online to somebody out of state, you're not having to sell the tax. We don't require any stores on a local sale to figure out where the consumer came from and then send the tax over to that state. They simply collect the tax that's due in their state. So the compliance requirements are completely different. Indeed, there are over 9,600 taxing jurisdictions in the United States. This bill specifically permits audits from the other states that have sales tax and from Indian reservations, and we have several hundred federally recognized Indian tribes. So this is going to create a huge compliance burden for our small business, and I just don't think it's good policy to saddle small businesses in Florida with red tape and additional compliance costs. I mean, why on earth would any Floridian want an up-and-coming business to face a tax audit from a state like California or Illinois? And I would say, as the gentleman from Kentucky pointed out, especially in light of what we're seeing with the malfeasance committed by the IRS out of Washington, D.C. The IRS is at least somewhat accountable to the people, at least in theory, because we can always vote out the administration that oversees the IRS. If you have an out-of-state tax audit, you don't have any political representation, so why would they care about your rights? They're not going to care about your rights. They're going to care about getting their revenue. I just want to say a thing about fairness. People say, well, you have brick and mortar local stores versus these internet businesses, but I would suggest that that distinction is illusory. And the reason why is many companies that do business online are brick and mortar companies. I have a business in my district in Ormond Beach, Florida. It's called Coastal Moto. And this is a gentleman that put his entire life savings into this business. They now have grown to have 5 employees. They make custom wheels for Harley-Davidson motorcycles, and they ship them worldwide. But they have employees showing up every day to work there, so they are both brick and mortar and online. So it's essentially brick and click. And I would also just endorse what the gentleman from Kentucky said, that the tax would give large companies a competitive advantage, because anytime you saddle businesses with more compliance costs, that will create barriers to entry for smaller companies, and the big businesses are always able to comply more easily. And look, I want companies of all sizes to do well. Big businesses, if they're doing well, God bless them. I just don't want to tilt the playing field in favor of them and make it more difficult for new businesses to start and grow. The internet is one of the most pro-growth, pro-opportunity inventions in all of human history. It literally gives anybody the chance to move a product. If you have an idea, you can go online, you can put that out, and you can be successful. It's much easier with the internet to have a successful business than it was 100 years ago. You're able to get into the market more cheaply and more affordably. That's not something that we should try to undermine. That's something that we should want to continue to promote. And finally, I would just say, is it fair to burden Florida businesses in order to fund excessive spending in states that suffer from severe fiscal mismanagement? I mean, for example, in California, you have county administrators retiring with a $400,000 pension for life. And so we're going to put burdens on our companies to be able to send money over there so that they can fund that extravagance. And I would also note that a lot of that money goes to funding union dues that end up helping fund political campaigns. So why would we want to do that? So the bottom line is that the bill is bad for consumers. It represents taxation